Welcome to Cryptid Radio. My name is Adeline. I rigged up this relay tower to bring you this broadcast on cryptids and creatures of the area. I'll come up here and change out the holotape when I can. A little while back, I took a trip up to Holt Farms to gather some cranberries. I enjoy making cranberry cobbler and cranberry meatball grinders, and Holt Farms is a much safer place to get them than anywhere in the cranberry bog. Plus, I always have a chance of running into a cryptid or two to research along the way. Anyway, after I collected the cranberries and some razor grain, I headed back to my camp for the night before I headed home in the morning. I know, I could have just slept at the farm, but it doesn't feel right sleeping in someone else's house. So, I camp. While I was walking down the road, I came across a strangely happy and fancily dressed man. I don't usually make it a habit to approach random people on the road, but this guy had a strange pull to him. I went up and said hi. He said, "Salutations." I don't think I've ever heard anyone actually use that greeting. Then he told me not to be afraid in his eerie, calm voice, while creepily smiling. I've run into plenty of people hopped up on Jet or Psycho that smile at me and tell me not to be afraid, but this was completely different. Like, chills up your spine different. So I complimented his jacket and asked him his name. I didn't know what else to do. He said, "I'm cold. You may call me Indrid." I stopped for a second. That sounded really familiar. I decided to just ask him what he was doing out here. I was beginning to feel all creepy crawly. I needed a way out or some way to make this not feel so strange. It didn't help. His answer was, "Seeking a seeker who cannot be found. Or perhaps it is I that am lost." What is that? A riddle? Then he said he's been away for a long time and much has changed. So maybe he lived here before the war? But with that line of thought and his demeanor, it makes me wonder, did he escape from Allegheny? I was panicking. Was I in the presence of an actual psychopath, not just someone hopped up on chems? He then asked me to recommend a local peculiarity. My mind was blank. I was lost. So I just started telling him about cryptids. I told him about Mothman, Sheep Squatch, Snallygasters, and the Grafted Monster. He wasn't surprised by any of it. He just kept smiling through it all. Then I told him I really had to get going. He responds with, "Ever dance with the devil under a blue moon?" I said, "Nope, bye," and I started to head home. There was no way I was camping out there that night. I'd just suck it up and walk home. I didn't care how tired I was. I don't like walking away from people I don't know, so while I was walking, I kept looking back. And then when I was about a half a mile down the road, he burst into a mass of smoke that floated away on the wind. I booked it after that. When I got home, I was exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. I couldn't get the familiarity of his words out of my head. Then, all of a sudden, it clicked. Indrid Cold. I don't know how I didn't put it together before. He's the smiling man. I assume it was the uneasy aura he was giving off that made my mind so fuzzy. The fact that he's still alive 140 years after he was first encountered means that he is definitely an alien, cryptid, or at least cryptid adjacent. I'd read about him in Calvin Van Lowe's place when I was looking through all of his papers. Indrid Cold, eventually given the moniker the Smiling Man, was first reported in November of 1966 by a man named Woodrow Derenberger. Mr. Derenberger was a sewing machine salesman from West Virginia. If you remember anything about West Virginia in November 1966, it's when Mothman was first spotted. One night, on his way home from a business trip, he heard rattling around in the back of his truck. It sounded like sewing machines had come loose. So he pulled over to adjust his inventory. When he got back in his truck and on the road, he noticed bright lights ahead of him. He thought it was a police officer. So he stopped again, but what he saw wasn't police. He described it as an aircraft. in the shape of a kerosene lamp chimney. A man stepped out of the craft and approached the truck. The man looked as normal as any human being to Derenberger. He was described as being around 6 feet tall, having a good tan, dark hair combed straight back, and a huge smile that never wavered. He was wearing a reflective suit with a black belt. Derenberger reported feeling terrified. The man spoke to Derenberger, but telepathically. He asked Derenberger to roll down his window, asked him his name, and asked him why he was frightened. Then the man said, "Don't be frightened. We wish you no harm. We mean you no harm. We wish you only happiness." Finally, he introduced himself as Indrid Cold, and then left, saying, "We'll see you again." When Derenberger got into town, he reported his encounter to the police. The next day, it was a media frenzy. Derenberger was interviewed on live television by the local airport, the police, and a representative from the Air Force. After the interviews aired, other people came forward with claims of having seen the man and the aircraft. Over the course of the next month, Derenberger claimed he was visited by Indrid Cold many times at his home. His home would also receive strange phone calls. It got to the point that Derenberger went to psychiatrists to make sure he wasn't insane. The doctor gave him a clean bill of health and said there was no evidence of any chemical imbalance. Not long after the visit, Derenberger's doctor reported Indrid Cold showing up and speaking to him telepathically as well. Eventually, the hysteria around Indrid Cold petered off. There were books written and published, but there weren't really any more sightings of him. Some speculated he was part of Men in Black. Some speculated he was tied in with Mothman in some way because of the time period. No one really knows. But now, he's wandering around out here, in Appalachia, without his aircraft, looking for something from what I could tell, giving off a super unsettling aura and disappearing into bursts of smoke. Until next time, keep your eyes open and stay safe out there.